What? Which part?
Kyle standing up in the background.
Yes. Welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing. I'm Cassie Winter.
Alicia Marshall.
And tonight we are talking about the oft-contested topic of light versus heavy connection in West Coast Swing. We've got 2 videos to analyze with you folks tonight. We have a bit of a spiel to go on before we share the videos. Shall I just dive into it, Alicia?
Go right ahead.
Right ahead. All right, cool. I have lots of feelings about this topic. Strong feelings. But one of the metaphors that I often use is I equate connection to how many bars of cell phone signal you have on your cell phone. The more bars, the better, because connection is a way that you communicate with your partner. And if you don't have a strong connection, you can't really communicate effectively. In contrast to that, there's volume. So it's like if you have 5 bars on your cell phone, and you yell into the phone, you're gonna hurt the person on the other end because their eardrum's gonna burst, that kind of thing. So with great power comes great responsibility. Because connection is not only how you communicate, but you can also leverage that connection to make your movement more effective. So you're not only having more control under your own power, but you're better able to communicate what you're doing with your partner. So personally, I prefer a really strong connection that's responsive, whereby you're not necessarily actually moving your partner with that connection. You're just using a really strong connection to move yourself and to communicate effectively. But like with any kind of technique in West Coast Swing, how heavy your connection is a tool. And there are instances where a light connection is a better choice than a heavy connection. So for instance, any part where like a follow's arm or even a leader's arm is over their head, it's usually better to have a lighter connection because you're in a much more compromised position and be more easily hurt in position.
Yeah, I was literally going to say that.
So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say because we'll talk more as we go over the videos, but is there stuff you wanted to add to that?
I think I just want to add on to that last part. I've worked with Parker and Melissa for a while now, and when I worked with Parker, he has talked about having a lighter connection when you are, anywhere above your head, and he was talking to me about how that gives him a lot more options, like to change something mid-pattern. And he was saying that when there's a lot of connection with his follow while it's, up over the head, he chooses not to do much just because it is hard to like change shaping and whatnot. So just wanted to add that, and I think we're good.
All right, let me grab the link for the first video. The first video we are going to be watching tonight is between Sarah Van Drake and Benji Schwimmer from Boogie 2016. Go ahead and give it a watch and let us know when you're done. And the second video we're going to be going over tonight is Larissa Tinkle and Dylan Luther from Sea to Sky. Link is now in the chat, so go ahead and give that one a watch as well. So I have one last thing that I forgot to include in my earlier spiel. So this is spiel part 2, because I've heard a lot in my career in West Coast Swing, teachers saying that you cannot see connection. And I 100% disagree with that statement. You can't see all of it. Like that isn't possible, but you can see a lot. And we're not even going to remotely touch on everything that you can see in tonight's episode, but like that's why we're here. We'll keep talking about these things forever and ever, because now we have 86 subscribers on YouTube. Hell yeah. If you're watching the replay, please hit subscribe. You can see a lot more than you think you can. And a lot of it comes from understanding the order of operations, like the chain of cause and effect in connection, and understanding how movements through time and the cause and effect chain is a result of good or bad connection. So we're going to be pointing out some of that stuff tonight. As always, if you have questions at any point, feel free to unmute yourself or ask it in the chat. Yes. Aaron said the second song between Larissa and Dylan felt a little safer, if that makes sense, like they played it super safe. But yes, that is the thing we will be talking about. All right, to The screen share. So one of the things personally I really love about this dance is it's really well connected and partnered and with a strong connection the majority of the time. But they're using it really as a means of communication. There are only a few points in this dance where Benji is really using that connection to forcibly move Sarah in a way that he wants. The majority of the time it's for connection and communication.
Mm-hmm. I want to add to that. So a lot of times, if you watch Benji lead another follow, it will look a little bit more chaotic than it does with Sarah. And it's because Sarah is very grounded. And so she makes herself harder to move. And because of that, I think he does adjust a little bit. So he's not quite as aggressive with her. But there are still some moments that, he is, uses more heavy connection to his advantage, I guess. But just wanted to make that note.
Yeah. Actually, I've always been jealous of Sarah. Like she sometimes makes jokes about how short she is, but that's such a boon as a dancer because her center is so close to the ground. It is easier for her to ground herself and be really stable.
Mm-hmm.
I've always joked that if I could like body switch with anybody, it would be Sarah.
The complete opposite.
Complete opposite. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about this moment in particular at the beginning of the dance because they have a really strong center counterpoint with their handhold. So Benji scrolls away, catches cross hands, so left to left with her. And the hand isn't really going anywhere at this point. They're just using it to connect, and it slowly comes down. But all that movement through Sarah's body through this moment, my guess is that Benji can feel that in the handhold, that there's a lot of tension in that handhold that's allowing Benji to feel that. So he's not just using visual cues to understand what Sarah's doing and to understand when she's done, but they actually feel it. So like this point where Sarah does this side step with a delayed swing of the hips, right there's a lot of connection in that handhold, and that's why they're both able to hold this moment so clearly and together.
Right. And as their arms slightly drop, that connection gets stronger. So it might start out a little bit more like medium level connection, but get heavier as it drops.
Yep. And then you notice how Benji brings it up for a second. And the way I would use that technique is like, okay, there's a lot of tension. Let's relax it for a second and realize we're moving on.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a relaxing of the connection so that way they can grow it again.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like how we talk about like dissipating momentum. Mm-hmm. It's kind of similar in that way where like you need to, drop it up or down to change something with it.
Yep. Oh, so this is a really interesting moment right here. Because Benji is very much accelerating this moment. Mm-hmm. Like he's trying to trade places with her quickly based on how quickly he's moving. But Sarah's holding her ground and resisting that. Mm-hmm. And so she resists it enough for Benji to get the memo. And then it relaxes so it can drape comfortably to her other shoulder.
Yeah. And one way that you can see that she is resisting is this like slide that she does with her foot. You can see that she's really pressing into the ground in order to do that. And that's going to cause a lot of resistance in what you're doing if you're pressing through the ground a lot more.
Yeah, because she's very much she's not fully weighted on her left foot.
Right.
Here. I love her so much. Sarah's someone that I watch if I'm struggling with confidence in my own dancing, because she just both really loves what she does and enjoys it.
Yeah.
And gives no fucks whether everybody knows.
Yep.
She's like, yeah, I'm going to have the time of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm going to enjoy it. And it's just so inspirational if you're struggling with confidence at all. So that's just like a little side note.
I would put Melissa in with that category as well.
Agreed. And also Courtney.
Yeah.
This side pass right here. There is a lot of tension in this handhold right now. And you can tell because Sarah's arm is fully extended.
Right.
And she's ever so slightly pitched forward of her standing foot. So she's trying to get away, but she can't quite because the connection is so tethered.
Yeah, and you can see like her upper body is rotated in. So it's rotating to the left to allow some more space with that right arm for connection.
Yep. So you can see how this shoulder is closer to Benji than this hip. And then to lead out of it, because this is one of those things where depending on what you want to create as a leader on one of your new pattern, you often have to dance your anchor beforehand differently to set it up. And so Benji created a really strong post and a really intense tether, which is creating what we've just talked about in Sarah. And then he's using that to really press into his left foot. So you can see he's not doing a delayed weight transfer. He's very much arriving over this left foot at the very close to the foot strike.
Yeah.
And that is creating a really strong one for Sarah. And you can see she's getting pulled forward if you watch her right foot.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a really strong, heavy connection, but that is being used correctly.
Right.
And you'll notice how Benji, after this weight transfer here onto his left foot, he comes back to his right just a little bit. So Sarah doesn't have to travel as far.
Yeah. Which is really helpful when there is a strong like acceleration.
And then
she can slow down at the end. If you keep moving towards her as a lead, she's going to have to continue running down the slot. And so every step she takes is going to be very large.
And it'll be much harder for the follow to slow down in that instance. Then another thing I want to point out is the slot actually shifts over. So Sarah is dancing on this slot to begin with, but she finishes on this one. So instead of Benji getting back into her original slot, Sarah is traveling to get onto his. And that's where it's a combination of both linear and lateral connection. that's coming into play, and having that tethered transition from linear right here to lateral as she crosses over is a really great way to let the momentum resolve itself, because there's an arc.
Right.
And this is the apex of the energy here, and it naturally resolves as it comes out here. So here's an example of light connection, very strategic use of it. So while yes, Benji is connecting with Sarah's left thigh, because she is currently weighted partially on that leg, if he were to use a lot of force here, he would knock her over. So this is an instance where he's being lighter and more inviting and allowing her to follow it at her own pace.
Right.
So while in general this is a very heavy connection dance, that was an instance of there being really light connection.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so, and with Sarah you can see like she acknowledges that he is putting that hand on her leg, but then she kind of chooses to wait and then settle into it before she turns. So she's kind of using it to help her rotate.
Yeah, because she twists into it just a little bit right there.
Right, which is going to help prep her to get some momentum for this turn. Right, because he's not necessarily creating that momentum for her because the connection is so light. He's moving around her. And you can even see his hand like moving further forward.
Yep.
So had she not prepped herself in that moment, she would not have been able to get around those turns.
So here's an example of a really fast increase in connection and use of that. So Benji, it's a little hard to tell because of the way Sarah is dancing through this moment, but Benji is shaping that 1 for her, and then the 2, and he accelerated the 2. So he finished prepping the shape for what would normally be a count 2 a little bit ahead of count 2. So that way, by the time she actually lands on her left foot on count 2, she's already pivoting to the left. And it's really important to notice that he's creating that with the closed position hand, his right hand on her back. So you can see right here, this position he's in, his elbow is more in front of his ribs, and his wrist is probably at this angle a little bit. As opposed to comfortable, he's stretching the front of his wrist to create that shape, and then he's popping his elbow and the wrist really quickly right here. So it's not the open handhold that's creating that acceleration. I'm going to repeat that again because it's really important. Here, it is not the open handhold. It is instead the closed position handhold that is creating the acceleration. The open position handhold is just following through with it. Is there anything more you wanted to say about that, or should I go on?
Not necessarily. So I think the only thing that I really would note is that change in the handhold is really important to look for in order to see if the connection is coming from that or not.
Yep.
So when you have like leads that have their, fingers more extended, that's typically going to be a lighter connection.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't have this bookmarked, but this is another good example. So right here.
Yeah.
Benji is catching Sarah really far across her back, which is not something I would recommend as your baseline whip connection.
Right.
But he's doing that because he wants to take her momentum of traveling and turning down the slot and take it for his own. And so he takes that momentum and rides it in a pivot. And that's how he's able to turn so quickly and step so far across the slot, because he's using that really heavy, strong connection. And basically, Sarah is doing the work for him here. He's just riding the energy.
Right.
And this is one of those instances where one of the ways you can tell is because order of operations. So he catches Sarah's back. Sarah is the one moving. He lets his right shoulder open a little bit, but after a split second, his body starts following. So the cause is Sarah moving and he's attached to her. So then he rotates equally following that. Hopefully that made sense.
I think so.
So Benji is the effect, whereas Sarah is the cause. And the effect is happening afterwards in time.
Mm-hmm. I think one more thing that I wanted to note on that is that when you see Benji rotating, like allowing himself to ride that momentum, you can see that foot is like flat on the floor. However, the weight is going to be either a little bit more forward or a little bit more backward, even though it does look flat. If you have all of your weight just flat on that, you're not going to rotate very well. So you're not going to be able to use that momentum for anything.
Yeah, and you watch really closely. As soon as he picks up his right foot and he starts pivoting, he's pivoting on his heel first.
Yep, and then it changes to
and
the
then
toe.
to the toe. Heel, 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 toe, toe, toe. And that's because of how his pitch is changing ever so slightly in reaction to Sarah.
I do want to know, like, how far back his arms are going.
Yeah, for the click clacks.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So they start like way in front of him.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of those parts where this works because their foreheads are touching.
Mm-hmm.
If their foreheads were not touching, this handhold would be super awkward for both of them, and it would be hard to connect. But they're actually compressing their foreheads here, which is making this easier. And it allows this to happen because as a follow, you cannot connect effectively when the hands are directly below your shoulders at full extension. You get really heavy for your leader really fast in a way that isn't good.
Right.
Because you become heavy in a way where you are then unresponsive just because physics.
Yeah.
So the forehead compression is really important here. And
you can see Sarah's arm kind of going into that position that you were just talking about, but it's not going to affect what they're doing quite as much because it's not just her going straight down, right? So there's like that momentum going into it.
It's arcing. Yeah.
And it's not staying right in that same place.
Yeah.
But then he also uses that connection right here in order to send her.
Yeah, and that's the next thing I had bookmarked.
Yeah.
So right here, you can tell just by looking at Sarah's left elbow, her arm is basically locked.
Yeah.
So she's still connected. Her frame isn't broken, but with a locked arm, all Benji has to do is push up on it to make her whole body move.
Mm-hmm.
So right here, he pushes up on it, and that's what brings her upright. And he catches it immediately to create the body roll. So he starts bringing her up. He's using compression on that locked arm to bring her up. But right about here, he transitions to tension immediately
Mm-hmm.
and redirects it. Instead of there being this gradual tension, gradual compression, it's very much like boop, boop. There's an instantaneous transition between the compression to the tension. And that's what creates the really strong body roll.
Mm-hmm.
And the faster you do transitions like that, the more equal and opposite you need out the other side. So this is really fast, this redirect, but then the resolution of it is slower.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to note that he's not like pulling her towards him
Mm-mm.
at all to get that send out. It's that arc.
Yep. So as soon as he transitions it to a tension, you can tell it becomes a center counterpoint. So he's creating that tension by moving himself away and allowing her to have just a little bit of shaping. He's moving his hands like maybe an inch, if that. And then he's coming towards the hands while bringing them out. And that's why Sarah doesn't have to travel very far to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
Super important. Oh, I can tell this beautiful story now. This is exciting. So notice how right here, very obviously, Sarah is bent over because of the hand connection and her locked arms. It's really normal for a leader to send a follow out, but then to go back down there. They do this and then this.
Yeah.
And that forces the follow to bend over. And I once was led in that so strongly. And because of my height, I ended up like almost completely bent over. So this is my arm, this is my head. And then I was pulled down in this direction so hard, my free leg had to kick up to counterbalance myself. And a dear friend of mine was walking behind me when that happened, and I came this close to just decking them in the head with my foot. It was nobody died. There was almost death. Makes a good story. So the moral of the story, leaders, is do not do this and then this. Do this and then this. Be Benji. Anyways, onward.
Do we want to shift to our second video?
Yeah. So, in contrast to Benji and Sarah, the connection in this dance between Dylan and Larissa has a lighter baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And right here is an example. We saw earlier how Sarah really used increased tension and more grounding to indicate that she wanted to stop and do something during a pass. Whereas here, Larissa is just slowing down and lightening the connection.
Right.
But that's only possible because Dylan's connection was light to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So light plus light equals, oh, I can do something light to communicate what I want to do.
Right. And you can even see that they're going fully through that like open handhold where it's just like palm connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really obvious right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then another indicator is the way Larissa's hand right here, as she continues to turn, stays kind of there in space. And you can see how her arm right here is now out to the side of her as opposed to in front of her. That means the connection kind of relaxed a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing to note is that I think Larissa does tend to have a lighter connection because she likes to have more control of what she's doing, hold her own body weight a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dylan is reacting to that because I don't personally feel that when I dance with him. So it's really great on his end that he's choosing to let her do what she wants to do.
Yep. So the thing to pay attention to here is where the center counterpoint is.
Mm-hmm. And what it's doing.
Yeah, because for a while, the hand is the center counterpoint right here. You can tell that the hand is not traveling towards either of them. It's staying like in between the L and the E on the sign.
Mm-hmm.
But right here, it travels toward Larissa. So it transitioned from the handhold being the center counterpoint. So right here, the hand is the center counterpoint. But then it transitions to Dylan's shoulder being the center counterpoint.
Right.
And because on the other side, Larissa is staying very centered over her standing foot.
Mm-hmm.
She's not actually increasing the amount of weight that's in that handhold.
Right.
Which means it's a very light connection.
Right. And one way that you can also see that is you can see how much the connection is rotating. Because her hand is like underneath, kind of, at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to like a normal connection.
Oh, yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see if Larissa's right thumb were extended out from her palm, it would be pointing towards the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a rule of thumb, like a medium funny, whenever a follow's arm is rotated such that their thumb is pointing towards the floor, they have to be disengaging their shoulder to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So follows who had the experience to protect themselves in this moment really lighten things up. They give less control to their partner over their own movement. So that way, if the arm were to suddenly move again, it wouldn't hurt their shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important as leaders to pay attention to that, because you can also put a follow in that position, but sometimes they do it to themselves. And I'm always hyper aware if it's pronation, right? If a follow's arm is pronated, because whenever a follow's frame is in this position, when I'm leading them, I loosen up and I lighten the connection because I don't want to injure them.
Mm-hmm. And you can see with this that Larissa is doing exactly that. Like she's keeping more control over what she's doing.
Yep.
Typically when you get in a position similar to this is a follow, because it's so at an angle almost, you're going to be kind of hanging off that connection. So it's going to be heavy connection typically. However, Larissa's doing it in a way that it looks like that, but that's not actually what's happening. She's keeping most of her weight over that right standing foot.
Mm-hmm.
And she's using Dylan ever so slightly, but honestly, she's mostly internally counterbalanced. So it looks like it could be heavy connection, but it's not.
Yeah, because her hips are just enough over her standing foot and her free foot is extended out ahead of her that it is counterbalancing her upper body weight.
Mm-hmm.
So she is very much under her own power. And then back to the order of operations. With Benji and Sarah, you could see a very clear cause and effect reaction of movements based on the timing of the connection. But here, there's some ambiguity to what cause and effect is happening.
Yeah.
Because you can see Dylan's hip weight moving down the slot at this point, but Larissa isn't really following through with it, it means that there's a very light connection. And you can see she doesn't start coming forward until actually after he stops progressing with his hips.
Yep.
And based on everything that came before, that is a further indicator that it's a lighter connection.
Mm-hmm.
If there were a super heavy connection right here and Dylan lifted the hand, that would bring her forward. That's kind of like what we talked about with the body roll at the end of Benji and Sarah. But right here, because there are indicators of a light connection going into this moment, that discordance in timing of cause and effect is a further indication of a light connection.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, like, you can see that he is slightly, that hip weight is moving down the slot. She is not moving herself, but the way that she's rotating is giving that, like, energy to him as if she is moving a little bit forward, just because that shoulder is rotating more towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also see that she's creating the look like she's almost moving forward with that leg that's stretching out.
Yep. It's very sneaky. Personally, I would handle this differently. First of all, I try not to let a leader ever let me pronate my arm this much, personally, because I have a shitty right shoulder. But I love being super heavy in moments like this.
Mm-hmm.
And actually having the leader drawing my right side forward while I resist it with my left side. So I'm rotating my upper body to my left, but I'm resisting that rotation.
Mm-hmm.
So right here you can see that instead of Larissa's right shoulder coming towards Dylan, it's instead she's unfolding and her left shoulder is getting farther away. That's her counterbalancing herself. I prefer resisting the leader drawing my right side forward in these kind of contra body positions because it feels so good to resolve.
Yeah.
That's just a personal preference thing for me. So right here, you can tell that Larissa isn't pushing him very hard because he's not having to resist his weight transfers.
Right. And he's also not using it to give himself more momentum.
Yeah. He's not trying to slow himself down.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes a big step on his own instead of letting Larissa create a big step.
Right.
And then this one is another instance of a really light connection because of all of the control they both have over their own movements.
So I do want to say, like, she has her hand on his chest, right? And what he can do is press out of that standing leg to really move himself and, like, use that resistance if she was creating a lot of resistance for him.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see he's reaching with that foot rather than pressing out.
Yep.
So you would almost need to create, like, a little inwards, like, compression moment to prep that press.
Yeah.
But if there's a light connection, that's not going to be doable.
Another visual signal for what we're talking about is him finishing his weight transfer here as he steps back onto his left foot. First of all, his heel doesn't fully commit to the ground, which is one indication that he's not having to use his left foot to resist Larissa. If that heel were to have met the ground and his center would have stayed in front of that foot, he would have been using pitch and his heel as a brake to slow himself down, but he's not doing that. He's just kind of floating over it lightly enough that he doesn't even have to lower that heel.
Right.
All right. Another one. I really liked what you said at the very beginning about how that's actually usually a good thing through turn sequences. So I thought it'd be cool to hear your perspective.
So just because you can see that their connection is really light, so if Dylan wanted to, he could change that hand shape to do something different. He could, maybe a release or something along those lines, to do like, I don't know, redirect. I don't know. He could do whatever he wants to do from this position because there's such a light connection that he can move his hand around.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see Larissa has a little bit of shape to her arm. So what you typically see if there's quite a bit of connection in that arm when you're up above your head is you'll see like a really strong like C shape out of the follow.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see it with her, but it's not so much pressed out in front of her. So you'll kind of see it more drastically like in front and just like away from the body to keep some connection with the shoulder.
Yeah, this one you can tell right here, her elbow is in front of her sternum and her hand is to the left of her head. So it's creating a longer tether, which creates a slower reaction time and also has to be lighter or otherwise you'd probably hurt yourself in that position. And another indication, if you're just looking for visual cues for is this light or not, is how the majority of this turn, the power of it is really coming from Dylan's arm. And it's like he's originating it from the shoulder and it's following through down his arm. He's not using his waist to power it. So any sort of high-powered, heavier connection speed turns that are generated from the open handhold, usually that power originates from the leader's core, and then it moves through the shoulder and then down the arm. But you can see right here, it's very much just coming from his shoulder through to his hand. Much more chill and relaxed. So that's another indication of this being a light connection.
Right. And in theory, once you have that hand start lowering, as soon as you get about shoulder level, you're going to start creating whatever connection you want to go into, whether it's maintaining that same level of light connection or if you're going back to a heavier connection, that's about the point where you want to do it.
Yeah. So
right about here.
And it's not just the height, but also where it is it should be in front of the follow. If you start adding a lot of weight to the connection while it's still like above the head or they haven't gotten their arm more in front of them again, it can be dangerous to add a lot of power in that position unless you prepped it correctly.
Right.
So here's another instance, which is a really interesting contrast to Benji and Sarah. So right here, We have compression, but it's very light because you can tell they're both moving at the exact same rate. There was never a change in their rates of movement down the slot. There was never a moment in time where this changed all of a sudden and reacclimated to itself.
Right.
And that's an indication that it's a super light connection.
Also, the fact that they just switched between hands while they're moving down the slot.
Yes. But to counter this, if this had been a heavier compression, what we would have seen is as soon as Larissa starts running into it, if Dylan was asking for heavier compression, she would have slowed down a little bit. But she didn't.
Yeah, and you might have even seen a little bit of arm movement from Dylan, but it's staying in basically the same spot.
Yeah. And what he could have done is, if he wanted to continue progressing, all he would have had to have done, if he wanted more connection here, is to let his right side slow down and let his left side progress a little bit more. So he would have been shaped to the follows in the chairs.
Yeah.
And that would have allowed him to continue progressing, but allowed his right side to slow down just a little bit to ask for some more compression.
Right. And that also puts his arm in a spot where he can more easily use like the core to do whatever he's doing, you know?
Elbow magic.
Yeah.
Because right here, if you were standing behind him, his right elbow is to the right of his torso. So he's having to use the weaker muscles on the front of his shoulder to offer support. But if he were shaped to his left a little bit, his tricep and elbow could be braced against his ribs, and he wouldn't be having to use only his arms and his shoulder to counter Larissa.
Right.
But again, this is a really light connection, which is why he doesn't need to do that. But then this gets into the territory of like, well, I don't need to do it, but it looks good to do it. So this is a choice that I would have made differently. I would have shaped to my left as a leader here, even though my follow didn't need the compression. I would have still done it because that shaping looks nice. All right, let's do one more because we started a little bit late.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about this because one of the things that Larissa and a lot of the high-level follows are really good at is supporting their weight through moves like this. So Dylan is functioning more as a point of balance, some extra proprioception so she knows where the world is while she's moving so quickly.
Yep.
But she's very much under her own power and control here. And you can tell right here at the beginning how she shifts her hips forward and lifts her heels up. So she's very much centered over her feet.
Right. She's almost coming into a sitting position onto her heels.
Yeah.
And that's just going to create that counterbalance where she doesn't necessarily need Dylan to like hold her up, but she still will use it for, you know, the momentum and a little bit of balance. Yep.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns, bad jokes in the honor of Emma, who is not with us tonight?
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
So it seemed like in both videos, like Benji did use light connection in some parts, but it seemed like obviously very much favored heavy connection. Is
correct.
I mean, is that generally the go-to? I don't know if I've had very many dances where like I have switched, but like I can think of like maybe a couple where I've like maybe started out with really heavy connection, but then we've gone like into more light connection on certain things. But like, yeah, I was wondering your thoughts on that, like of like varying it significantly throughout a dance.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I like to think about it is you have your baseline, and you keep like a certain window on either side of that you go. So personally, I like my baseline to be a heavier connection in both rolls. And if I'm going to go light, I don't go like feather light, because that would be too much of a change.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's really common because, again, it's a tool. So what are you trying to accomplish at any point in time? So transitioning between light and heavy can be really helpful throughout a dance.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to say it is a really common thing, I would say, at higher levels to be moving back and forth between lighter and heavier tension. And part of that is because there's a lot of playing around with pitch. So like, you might have part of the song be pretty upright, but then, as a follow, if you like get to your end of the slot and you want to really like stretch back, that's going to create, like heavier tension. And so that's something that it's very dynamic, and that's a good thing, right? So if you'll have like one level of connection the whole time, there's not going to be a lot that you can do in terms of like the pitches and like stretching out. And like as a follow especially, there's like, I don't want to say it, but the idea of like hanging off the connection. So that's kind of like having, a connection in the middle, but then a lot of your weight just kind of hangs back. And that's not something that you want to be at all the time, but it is a really good tool to use for like really hanging back. Like that's the main thing. And yeah, it just makes the dance a lot more dynamic.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and a couple more things, because you said things, I'm like, ooh, that makes me think of things. Especially from a leader's perspective, is associating how heavy your connection is based on your phrasing. Mm-hmm. So depending on what kind of phrase mapping you like, I know like kind of the baseline is the leader tends to have more control the closer to the phrase change you get. So that would mean at the beginning of a phrase, as a leader, you could have a lighter connection, which would allow more opportunity for the follow to play. And then as you get closer and closer to the phrase change, you increase the tension, you increase the compression. So that way it's really clear where you're going, where you're driving to, right, so that the follow understands what you're ramping up to. And then another thing, if we think of a bouncing ball, just think of a ball bouncing. It's spacing through space. This is me getting into animator terminology now.
Are you talking about like the ball has bigger space, like it moves?
Yeah. So like if this is the top of the bounce and this is the bottom of the bounce, if we're talking about the up, it'll hit the ground and it'll speed up. So the spacing will be bigger. But then it'll start bunching up as it gets to the apex, and it'll slow out of that, and then it will get big again before it hits the ground. So there's this natural point where the energy resolves itself and then starts over again. And if you start applying that same type of thinking to the amount of tension or compression that you have, and thinking of letting it come to its natural apex and then resolving out the other side, you'll start finding your connection being much more organic and resolving itself in ways that create interesting things in the dance. So that's one of the things that I think is really good to watch Kyle for, because he's such an intuitive, thinks only like 1 or 2 counts ahead kind of a leader, that he's just reacting to what's happening. It's like, what can I do with this? And it's his really embodied feeling with that connection of the natural resolution of it based in swing timing and swing pattern structure that allows him to be so intuitive and just make shit up. And it's incredible. It's because he understands the natural resolution of connection and the cycling of it from light to heavy in tension or compression. So
yeah. Going off what you were saying, talking about like that structure of like the lead up to like a phrase change. So it's really important for leads to pay attention at the beginning of that, because at least like for me personally, I tend to use heavy connection as more of a way to like improv and like play around with the momentum that I have. And so I gradually increase, but like that's something that really needs to be paid attention to by the lead, because they also need to be equal and opposite. So just wanted to note that at the very beginning, before that phrase change comes up, the follow should have a little bit more opportunity. And like if you notice heavy connection starting to happen, or if there's like more connection happening all of a sudden, like reacting to that is going to allow the follow to go into whatever she might want to do, they might want to do. So that was just what I wanted to note off of that.
And like sudden changes that are extreme can be a really great way to get your partner to suddenly pay attention to you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely used that before and have that been used on me before to like, I'm like learned it from follows. And I was like, oh, that's really good. That's interesting, because I've had like the variable like dances, and they've definitely been more dynamic. Like it's the dances where it's like, oh, I know with this person the connection's going to stay exactly the same, and I can't really change it, or else things are going to happen. Like those are much more flat dances. So I haven't started using them for using it as much for like phrase changes though. Like that's something I was like, oh,
yeah, it's really fun. So every time you learn more stuff about phrasing, just have that idea of varying the connection along with the phrasing. It adds a really great depth to the connection and the dance as a whole.
Right.
And this reminds me of actually Alicia and I danced strictly together at Halloween Swing Thing last year. And we were both so tired. But I mean, I don't know what it is about my body. I love leading, and I think it's just because of how tall and large of a person I am. I can have a lot of power as a leader when I'm tired. I can't do that when I'm following. But there was this one point where I was leading Alicia in a double outside turn into a rock and go, into a prep for a double inside free spin. Rat-a-tat-tat. Very fast. And as she's coming through the rock and go portion, she just disappeared on me in the connection, like the weight was gone. And I'm like, oh, slow down now. So I halved the speed and it was fine, but it happened like that. And that's the kind of stuff that I love about this dance, is when you really get to understand the nuances of how that connection works, so you can actually use it as a conversation and communication. So.
I do want to note that doing that is more of like a release, so it's not like all of a sudden gone. But like it's you feel it happening.
Yeah, it was an extreme change between what it had been. So it had been a lot of energy, a lot of tension, and you were like, I'm gonna breathe now. And I loved it. It was so great because I was able to react to that in the moment. We were still on time. It was really cool. Any other questions about this juicy topic that we could talk about for hours on end?
Right.
Do you have a question? Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So like I'm pretty new at this, but I'm on the East Coast. So when you say like Larissa is light, that like kind of blows my mind a little bit, because people here are so much lighter than she is, having danced with her. So I'm just kind of curious if you have like a coast baseline or something.
Like, that's interesting.
The first time I danced with her, I was like, so that's what like dancing with somebody from the West Coast feels like, as opposed to dancing with somebody on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I'm-
one thing I will note is depending on how you lead Larissa, you'll get a different connection out of her. So if I want a heavy connection from her, I can adjust how I'm leading her to create that. And I love that. So that's how I prefer to dance with her. But I can also dance with her in a way that feels super light. So that video that we watched tonight is a light version. Whereas the video with Kyle that we analyzed when she was on with us, that was a much heavier connected dance. So she's capable of both. The question I would explore for your dancing is like, okay, what was I doing to create a heavy connection out of her? And also, basically, different cities have different habits. So like, we're from Portland. Portland tends to have a really light connection that doesn't post very strongly. And so it's a much lighter connection. So every city has its own kind of nuances.
Yeah, I'll also note that I believe East Coast does not play around as much with like that pitch and using that in terms of like weighting the connection quite as much. You'll see a lot more like upright dances, not in like a bad way, but you'll see a little bit more so on the East Coast rather than like in the California area, especially because there's so many pros there and they like experimenting with things. Like that's why there's a little bit more of that going on, whereas over on the East Coast it's, you know, a little bit more pattern based. So
and I think has more of its shag roots intact on the East Coast, I would say, because shag has an incredibly light connection. Does that help answer your question, Andrew? Sweet, thank you. Kate says, I've heard the East Coast follows don't give as much play and don't actually let their leads have any control over the follow. But that's hearsay. I mean, that's what I say about most advanced level follows, but that's because how advanced follows get judged.
Yeah.
That's what's rewarded.
Yeah.
Advanced, regardless of what role you're in, you're screwed, in my opinion, because I've danced both roles in advanced, and it's a shit show either way. It's great.
For very different reasons.
I know. I'm like, can we just
story time?
Can we work together? That'd be great. I'm like, I'm here for you. I'm like, this is a partner dance. That should be priority uno, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right next to timing and technique. But
it's like look at me, like,
right.
But as toddlers, like division. Whereas All Stars also look at me, but it's like older kids.
School. Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. So like one thing that you'll see with like the more, I mean, even in the higher levels, but more so in lower levels, like when you're competing, people dance so differently than socially. And I think that that's not a smart idea. It changes what you're doing entirely. You want to be more consistent about it. Like it's really hard to completely change the dancer that you are for competition. That's not going to be helpful for you.
And it will psych out your partner if they're used to dancing with you.
Yeah, that too.
I think we've all been there where we've drawn someone we've known really well and have danced with for years, and it's like they've been body snatched and you don't know who you're dancing with anymore.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
I 100% advocate for dancing how you dance when you're dancing.
No
And you're also you're honoring the Jack and Jill, in its strict for, like, you're showing off what you can do, not what you can do in this particular thing.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that I think advanced in particular struggles with is phrasing, because what happens is if the leaders can't phrase, it falls to the follow's job, because if a follow is not seen phrasing, they will not succeed in advanced. So it often falls to them to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And personally, the thing that I experience is because of my size, leaders don't know how to phrase with me because they can't dip me, they can't drop me. And then they're like, well, what do we do? And then they kind of shut me down, and I'm like, I can't throw you around. So learning how phrasing works from a contrast standpoint, because really you're just trying to create contrast that matches the music. You can do that with your basic patterns. You don't have to dip or drop someone to phrase effectively.
No.
My claim to fame was I got 4th place All-American Swingcouver with a very pregnant Ann Wood a few years ago.
And you didn't kill her?
I didn't kill either of us. I did not kill her. I obviously could not do shenanigans with her for clear reasons, and we placed higher than Sean McKeever. So phrasing is magical.
Very important. Very
if you
important.
actually understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So there, end rant.
I will also add to that, like, I'm a smaller follow, and I 95% of the time will refuse to do the dips and such. So a lot of leads will struggle to like figure out what to do. And like I think it's for me more assumed that I will do that and I won't. And then it's like once I totally veto that, it's like, okay, well, where do I go now? And I get shut down from there. And that is something that is harder for me because then like I can help like do something different. And just like Cassie was saying, like you can, you know, work together to make it something different, but like you're getting shut down, then not so much.
Yep, teamwork is magical.
Yeah, it is.
Highly recommend. This show would not exist without teamwork.
True.
Please subscribe. Help us reach 100 subscribers by the end of the summer. That'd be great. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really great, fun episode. We'll be back next week with Body Flight. Thank you all so
right,
much.
thanks for joining us.
See you next week.
Where does it hurt?
Yeah.
Oh, I hate
Everywhere.
that question. I hate it. Are you experiencing any pain today? And I'm like, can you be more specific? It's one of those
no,
nights
Emma
where I'm
today,
like,
they
I
told
will
me not to drive
gesticulate
my
and
car.
just lob liquid everywhere. Anyways.
Did you take out a slipper and then slap him across the face with it?
Oh, you know, I wanted to.
Insert awkward Spider-Man clip here. Anyways.
That's how you use that?
Because he doesn't believe me when I say some of now he does believe me.
Oh no, he's
Hold on.
Anything. I'll put a man next to me, whatever gets it done. I don't care who you are. Like, yep, sure. Hey, random guy, you want to go to the doctor's appointment with me? Don't believe me that way. I don't give a shit. Let's go.
Whoa, her elbow comes so close. I once got elbowed square in the center of my forehead by a partner in a formation team, and I had like a unicorn bruise for like a week. Good times. And this moment's gonna be fun in slow motion.
That face.
So good. I just noticed Maxime in the back.
I know. I was looking at that. He's like dying.
It's so great.
Was I saying something? Were you saying something?
I think we were both saying something. Insert sound effect of crickets here. We will not actually be flying, just in our minds, but without assistance. That joke just went downhill fast. I'm gonna shut up now.